You are listening to the Slow Living Podcast, and I'm your host, Stephanie O'Day. What if I told you that you could truly have the life of your dreams, the life you've always wanted, one filled with abundance, joy, and a sense of purpose? It's absolutely possible, and I see it each and every day with my coaching clients. It all starts with learning how to slow down. You deserve to live the life you've always dreamt about. Let's get started. So if you're a fan of the podcast, you're going to absolutely love the book. Slow Living, Cultivating a Life of Purpose in a Hustle-Driven World is now available wherever books are sold. Buy it for yourself, your children, your friends, and your neighbors. You can get all the juicy details at stephanieoday.com/slow living book. Trust me, this is hands down the best $20 you'll ever spend. Hello, Slow Down Society. Steph here, and welcome back to the Slow Living Podcast. I am thrilled you are here. I'm going to record a 2-part series on learning from memoirs because I absolutely love memoirs. And I read a lot and I listen to audiobooks while I walk Sheldon. And lately, I have been on a memoir kick. And so I want to record some of my thoughts on these great memoirs that I have listened to. So if you are new, thank you for being here. Thank you also to everyone who has bought my new book, Slow Living, Cultivating a Life of Purpose in a Hustle-Driven World. If you enjoyed the book, I would love for you to take the time to head over to Amazon and leave a review. Reviews super help me as an author and help the publisher because it kind of goofs around with the Amazon algorithm and the AI bots. They scroll through and kind of farm your words. And so anything that you write in the reviews, it helps kind of trigger the algorithm for other people searching for certain things. So anyway, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you. And I think you're amazing and wonderful and lovely and kind. And I am so thankful you're here. So this is episode 157, and it's part 1 of learning from memoirs. So I am a kind of a lifelong learner. I am 47, and I am most certainly not dead yet. And I know that there is so much left for me to learn. And so as much as possible, I just like to Google and search and absorb and learn. And if there's something that interests me, then I go down a rabbit hole and I research and I learn and I read and I absorb as much as possible. I usually do prefer nonfiction. I like personal development, how-to books. I like learning. And so that's why I personally gravitate towards nonfiction. I've gotten a few reader emails asking if I ever read fiction and if I had any book recommendations. I do here and there read fiction, especially when I'm on vacation and I want to turn my brain off. And then other times when I'm feeling kind of anxious and I need like a comfort read, I have a series of books that I go back through in times of stress. So a lot of times I'll pull it out in a hospital waiting room, or if I'm feeling really uncomfortable on a long flight, I'll go through and read my comfort reads. And I'll share that with you. So just for fun, before I launch into this first part on memoirs, I will give you some fiction books in case the idea of reading nonfiction just sounds really boring to you. Although I'm going to point out that it's not. So the last book that I read for fun was On Vacation with Adam, and it was called Eleanor Oliphant is Not Fine. And that's by Gail Honeyman. Liked that book a lot. Before then, the last long fiction book that I read was the year before On Vacation on a Beach, and that was called Beach Read, and that's by Emily Henry. I liked both of those books a lot, wholeheartedly recommend them. My comfort reading happens to be on the Kindle app on my phone. And these books are downloaded so I can pull them up whenever. And they are written by author Marie Force, and it's her Gansett Island series. And Gansett is Gansett. So these are romance books, and they're a little smutty. So if that offends you, don't read them. They they came to life to me in about, I don't know, 2012, 2014. And I was traveling a lot for the Ninja cooking system. And Ninja is owned by Europro. And I was in their infomercial, and then I needed to do like a press junket. So I did a lot of travel, and I did some cooking demonstrations with the Ninja cooking system. And at the time, the 50 Shades of Grey book had just come out. And I knew it was smutty, but I didn't know how bad. So I remember downloading it on my Kindle and sitting on a flight to Boston and just being so scandalized by reading it that I kept kind of like turning my Kindle away from the person next to me, because the idea that anyone could tell what I was reading really freaked me out. And I, I just it was a little too much for me. So I remember sharing that with one of the women that I was traveling with, and she's like, "Oh, Marie Force, you will like that then. Get into Marie Force." So the first book in the Gansett Island series happened to be called Made for Love, MAID, and I think at the time it was free. And it was like one of those, will hook you for free, and then you'll download all of the rest of the books in this series, just like a drug dealer. And it worked. And so those are my comfort books, and I'll just read them kind of in loop. I think there at the time there were 17 in the series. Now I think it's up to 27. And that's just comfort, kind of like when you're feeling a little down and you want to put on your comfort TV show. So maybe it's Seinfeld or Friends or Gilmore Girls or something you've seen every episode of, and you can just turn it on and it makes you happy. That's how I treat those books. Okay, but back to the topic of the day, which is learning from memoirs, part one. I think what I like about memoirs is you can always learn something from somebody else. And the idea that someone has had maybe a difficult time and persevered is it's really gratifying and comforting to listen to. And one thing about a memoir versus a different type of nonfiction book is they're not necessarily fact checked, and it is the author who is writing this, and it's their memory and their recollection. And so to them, it is a fact. But it's really interesting to listen to the perspective. And sometimes what's interesting is I don't necessarily agree with the author of the memoir and how they handled certain things. And so I like to think about that. I listened to these books over this past summer of 2024. So they're all somewhat fresh in my mind. And I used the Libby app, Libby, and that I hooked up to my library card. And I picked these books because they were Audible audiobooks, and because they were available right now. I did not need to wait, and I was impatient. I just wanted to continue to listen to something while I was walking Sheldon. I also listened to these books at 1.25 speed, which my oldest daughter, who's in law school, recommended to me. And at first, I thought there's no way I would be able to keep up and listen. But she's right. Your brain just kind of figures it out, and then you can listen to a book that says it's supposed to take 14 hours much faster. And that was gratifying for me also. Another thing about listening to them at 1.25 speed, I think in general, Audible books, they slow down in case you don't want to listen to things in a fast speed, and you don't have to. But for me, if there's too much pause between words, my mind starts to wander, and I start daydreaming and thinking about other things. And so listening to them for me at that speed helps keep me focused. Okay, so the first kind of juicy memoir that I listened to was Spare by Prince Harry, and it's read in his own British accent voice, and it was fascinating, and I just really liked it. And obviously Prince Harry has had a whole bunch of trauma. His mom died when he was 12. Um, but this book starts before that, and he had trauma even before that. So for me, I listened to this book with kind of like mom ears, and at times to me it sounded like a lot of like untreated ADHD and just layers of trauma after trauma. And I sort of just wanted to hug him and rock him and tell him it's all going to be okay. um he definitely had emotionally distant parents. He had a lot of expectations kind of thrown at him in a very, very young age. He had to constantly be on perfect manners. There was no tantruming. There was no safe space anywhere for him. And so, and even to this day, when I listen to him, he's got some work to do. He's got a lot of unresolved stuff he still is working through. He does talk about binge drinking quite a lot, and drug use, mostly marijuana, but just he's trying to escape. And so it's just really interesting to listen to that. Um, and I truly enjoyed it. From that book, after I downloaded Matthew Perry's memoir. So, and that's called Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. And the big terrible thing is Matthew Perry's addiction. He believes addiction is a button. And if you are prone to addiction and the button has been pushed, you will be an addict forever. And that's just who you are. And he starts the book saying that he got hooked on barbiturates as a baby because he had colic, and the pediatrician at the time prescribed his mom tranquilizers for him as a baby. And that pushed his addiction button, and he became hooked. And since then has always been chasing the next high. I was very interested in listening to this book because I don't consider myself to have an addictive personality, um, and have never really been hooked on anything that I couldn't just stop when I wanted to stop. Um, and I wanted to understand more, and I wanted to understand why, how an addict's brain works, so I can best be compassionate and empathetic and understanding when addicts enter my life. And so it's interesting. I got my nails done over the weekend, and my friend Jeanette was there, and she too had just listened to this book, and she talked about how she needed to keep pausing it because it was kind of heavy, and she just really felt for him. And I felt that way also. And then we also both came to kind of the realization that Matthew in this book really doesn't take very much personal responsibility. There's a lot of blaming of others, of doctors, of society, little things. I grew up watching Friends. I graduated in high school in 94, and Friends debuted in September of 94. And I mean, that was must see TV. I made sure I was home every Thursday night to watch Friends. And at the time, I wasn't paying attention and didn't know the markers of a drug addict. But now, with grown up eyes going back and watching the shows, it's very apparent that Matthew at times looked gaunt and withdrawn and is clearly struggling. And it's disappointing that the grown-ups in the room who wanted the show to continue and keep making money didn't put a stop to it. My hope is that doesn't happen now, and that people can recognize addiction for what it is, and not keep putting someone in a situation where they're unhealthy. I listened to the book in the beginning of the summer, and at that time, the news hadn't come out that Perry had actually died of an overdose. At that time, the narration was he died of a heart attack in a hot tub after playing pickleball because his heart was so worn out for years of drug abuse. And this memoir is written as if he had overcome his addiction and was out on the other side. Now, the news has come out that he actually did die of a massive drug overdose. And there are people in jail, including his personal assistant, for injecting him with drugs. And I have weird thoughts on that of whether or not the assistant should be in jail because he asked the assistant to do this. And it's kind of a slippery slope when someone you is paying you and housing you asks you to do something. So anyway, I have weird thoughts on that. Interesting book. I do recommend it. And I agree with my friend Jeanette, who said it was heavy and she needed to put it aside for a while because you do feel like you're reading someone's diary, an addiction diary. But what's interesting is usually in a diary, people are writing in a remorseful way or a way in which they're taking personal responsibility. And I didn't necessarily get that through reading his book. It seemed very blamey. So if you have thoughts on that, email me. Let me know. I know this was very widely read, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. The next book I listened to through the Libby app over the summer was Educated by Tara Westover. And I had never heard of Tara Westover before listening to the audio and didn't know anything about this book except for the Libby app had it available and it was ready to go. I have since learned that my oldest, a friend of hers mom, this is her favorite book. And she loved it and I can see why. It's so Lisa Lisa, I don't think you listen to my podcast, but if you do, I've been told this is your favorite book. Tara grew up sheltered in the mountains of Idaho on a family compound. She was homeschooled and taught by her parents and definitely isolated. Her family doesn't believe in modern medicine. She didn't have a birth certificate. She never was vaccinated. And everything she knew about the world was contained in her kind of family compound. Her dad at the time ran a junkyard. And so she was out like moving piles of junk around, moving heavy machinery at a very young age. The book goes through a lot of farm accidents, and some of them are kind of gruesome. So it's fascinating to listen to an accountal of someone's life of which I really couldn't relate. And I liked that because usually when I listen to books or read books, I try and put myself in the person's shoes and relate to it. And in many of these situations of listening to these memoirs over the summer, I couldn't relate to the author. And it was fascinating. And so just if you've come across any of these books, please let me know. So I really geeked out listening to the homeschooling discussion and the midwifery training and learning all of the things. There's definitely a lot of abuse in this book, so that could be a trigger warning. Her family continues to live on the compound and is Mormon, and she is now estranged from her family. Her parents ended up going on to develop a very well-known and lucrative essential oil company, and Tara doesn't believe in the claims that this essential oil company makes. She broke away from her family. She emancipated herself and went to BYU in Utah and then got a PhD in Oxford. And this is her memoir on how she educated herself. She's super well spoken, and this was an immensely interesting read. And she likens her childhood now as growing up in a cult and how she broke away from the cult. Speaking of Colts. First off, love Colts, fascinated by Colts. I think I don't remember the number of the episode, but if you scroll back through my show notes, I have written, I not written, I have recorded an episode on cults before and talk about my weird fascination with cults. So Jill Duggar's memoir is called Counting the Cost. And it was just a fantastic listen that I had. So I was home with my children for 12 years while I was writing and running the Crockpot site. And we watched a lot of the Duggar family. So I have lots of guilt and remorse in that I contributed to many of the eyeballs that were watching Jill Duggar and her siblings grow up. And at the time, I thought it was harmless. And even though I knew the internet and reality shows were something I wanted to keep my own kids far away from, to me, I thought the Duggars were more grounded and wholesome than, I don't know, like a John and Kate +8, because at least they weren't yelling at their kids. But after listening to Jill's accountal, there was definitely lots of manipulation and control abuse that happened and occurred within the household, and probably both of her parents, most deaf Jim Bob, have some kind of level of narcissism, and it just went unchecked for years and years. It's also really interesting to listen to how money and power changed the ethics and morals of the Duggars over time. She does go into the cover up about her brother Josh's sexual fetishes and pedophilia, and how she was encouraged to stick to the family talking points. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed listening. I'm proud of Jill. And I think it's interesting that I am proud of someone that I've never met in real life, but I think it's because I feel like I watched her grow up. And then as a grown up, she decided she didn't want her kids to live that way. And so she, in a sense, very similar back to Tara Westover's book, she educated herself and decided to break free. And she did estrange from her family. She has contact with her mom, but not a ton with her dad. And some of her siblings to this day keep their distance because she's essentially shunned. In a past episode, I had talked about, it was the end of the slow parenting series. I had talked about estrangement and how to keep your children from becoming estranged from you. And a lot of it is being humble and acknowledging your mistakes and apologizing from the deep depths of your soul. And I think both for Tara and for Jill, there's definite open wounds still here that their parents haven't fully acknowledged. There's a lot of excuses and kind of explanations instead of actual heartfelt remorse and vow to change apologies. And so just listening to that, listening to their words. Okay, so those were the first four, and I'll come back next week with the final three memoirs that I listened to over the summer. If you've come across these books, write to me. Let me know what your thoughts are. It's just so interesting. We do have a Facebook community that you can join if you want to geek out with other like-minded people. And that's called the Slow Down Society Facebook group. And it's linked on my main Facebook page. But as always, thank you for being here. I think you are lovely and wonderful. I'm proud of you for taking the time to listen and to learn and to know that if we're lucky, life is long. and you're not done yet. And you can always learn and absorb new things. Okay, see you again next week. Do you have a slow living story to share? Leave me a voicemail at stephanieodea.com/podcast with any questions, comments, feedback, or testimonials, and I will be sure to include it in an upcoming episode. Also, if you found value in this episode, please share it with your family and friends and subscribe through your favorite podcast provider. The more you share, comment, and leave positive reviews, the more people we can reach and share the slow living lifestyle and messaging. Thank you, Slow Down Society, and have an absolutely wonderful day.